They were told they could be anything. They were promised a future of opportunity. But now, an entire generation is fighting to survive in a system that seems rigged against them. Why is Gen Z struggling financially? And what does this mean for the future of us all? Imagine this. You've done everything right. You went to school, you worked hard, you followed the rules. But instead of climbing the ladder, you're buried under a mountain of debt, rising costs, and stagnant wages. What went wrong? And why does it feel like the odds are stacked against you? This is the reality for millions of Gen Zers. But how did we get here? And is there a way out?
I cannot stand how the news has been dogging Gen Z and calling them lazy for not wanting to work a 9-to-5 for the rest of their lives. Let me put it in perspective for everybody who's a little confused here, okay? I work 5 days out of the week, 40 hours a week, okay? I do not make enough to live on my own. I would not make enough to pay rent, water, electric, and eat. All by myself. I would not be capable of doing that. 20 years ago when you were getting started, you could live on your own. 20 years ago when you first started, you were able to do everything that I am now struggling to do. Let me add another perspective here. You've been working for 20 years. You have 20 years of working experience behind your belt. You have 20 years of experience in a career that has allowed you to gain raises, to get more money, to profit you in an economy that you created. You can sit here and you can call Gen Z lazy all you want, but I've been working my tail end off just to barely make it by. And respectfully, I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I don't want to work my tail end off, wasting all of my life working just to barely be able to pay my bills.
To understand the financial struggles of Gen Z, we need to go deeper. We need to uncover the hidden forces shaping their lives. The rising cost of education, the gig economy, the housing crisis, the shadow of the pandemic. Each one is a piece of the puzzle, but together they form a perfect storm. Let's start with the first piece of the puzzle, education. Gen Z was told that a degree was the key to success, but for many, it's become a trap.
Do you have any student loan debt?
I do.
A lot.
A lot.
How much debt do you think you'll have by the time you graduate?
A couple 100,000.
A couple 100,000?
Yeah.
After 4 years, probably about 100,000.
Over 100 easily. We both pay out of state tuition. 250.
$150,000? How are you avoiding debt right now?
My mom.
Probably 60 or 80,000.
Education was supposed to be the great equalizer, the key to a brighter future. But for Generation Z, that promise has been shattered. Beneath the glossy brochures and lofty graduation speeches lies a harsh reality that is drowning an entire generation before they even begin. $1.7 trillion. That's the weight crushing the shoulders of Gen Z, a number so staggering, it's hard to comprehend. But for millions of young Americans, it's not just a number, it's a life sentence. The pressure to attend college has never been greater, but the return on investment, it's vanishing before their eyes. The dream of higher education has become a trap. And for many, the cost of that dream is a lifetime of financial insecurity. But the crisis doesn't end with debt. For those who manage to graduate, the job market offers another cruel twist: underemployment.
Everyone, that in this economy, Gen Z, millennials, and some Gen Xers, many of us will not be able to do better than our parents. We won't even be able to do as well as our parents. And now the American dream has become just being able to get by, being able to maybe afford a house at some point, maybe have a kid or two if we're lucky enough to make that much money. And a lot of us, myself included, who has now experienced company financial related layoffs twice so far in the last 2 years since I've entered the job market. You know, those of us who feel like we're constantly in fight or flight about bills and how we're gonna keep making it by, it's making us miserable and feel so hopeless. And yes, I could sit here all day and show you graphs of how inflation is going up, and while wages are going up, it's just not matching inflation. So it feels like we're all just constantly working and working, and the goalpost just keeps getting moved further and further away from us.
Thousands of Gen Z graduates are working jobs that don't require a degree, their hard-earned diplomas gathering dust on the wall. The gap between education and the job market has never been wider. Colleges are churning out graduates, but the economy isn't ready to absorb them. The result? A generation of overqualified, underpaid workers struggling to make ends meet. The promise of education was supposed to be a ticket to a better life. But for Gen Z, it's become a broken contract, a debt they can't repay, and a future they can't afford. The question is, how did we get here? And more importantly, how do we fix it?
Does Gen Z actually have it worse than millennials financially? The data may point to yes, specifically because Gen Z is spending more on necessities than millennials did. Gen Z is spending more on housing and vehicle insurance than millennials, and even after accounting for inflation and higher incomes, Gen Z has more debt. Roughly 1 in 7 Gen Zers are maxed out on their credit cards, even though Gen Z workers are more likely to go to college, more likely to have a job, and make more money than millennials did. They are paying more than 31% for housing than their millennial counterparts did at their age. This chart shows inflation-adjusted change for 16 to 24-year-olds. If you thought grocery prices were bad, look at housing and insurance.
They were told flexibility meant freedom. Independence meant success. But for Gen Z, the gig economy isn't a choice. It's a survival tactic. Welcome to the new world of work, where stability is a relic and burnout is the price of admission. Gen Z now makes up nearly 40% of gig workers, driving ride shares, delivering meals, hustling freelance gigs. On the surface, it looks like autonomy. Dig deeper, and it's a labyrinth of insecurity, no health insurance, no paid leave, no future. These apps promise to be your own boss, but the real boss is an invisible system that profits from their exhaustion. For Gen Z, it's not a career, it's a trapdoor to perpetual uncertainty.
I've been having mental breakdowns every week, every few days, ever since I had more expenses and I had to worry about job, then cutting Christian job, then school, then rent, then buying a house within the next 12 to 24 months, and I've just been having nervous breakdowns all the time. I'm not gonna lie to you, and I haven't been going out, and I've been working non-stop, and I've been on my computer non-stop, and every time my mom has come in my room, I'm just editing a video. I'm just up at night editing a video or doing surveys for money, and I think at that point, maybe she sees some of my videos of my breakdowns, and she's like, oh, like, don't worry about rent, like, it's fine, just focus on school, on it. I think that's probably why, because I can't fucking keep it together. I'm losing my mind every day.
Turn your passion into profit. Monetize your hobbies. The mantra of hustle culture is everywhere, but beneath the glossy veneer lies a darker truth. For Gen Z, even their creativity has become a commodity. The pressure to monetize every waking hour isn't empowerment, it's exploitation. Passion becomes burnout. Hobbies become hustles. And the myth of just work harder ignores a system rigged against them. They're told hustle culture is the answer to financial instability. But what if it's just another lie? For every viral success story, thousands are drowning in the silence of unmet expectations. Hustle culture shifts blame onto individuals. It says, if you're struggling, you're not working hard enough. But no amount of side gigs can fix stagnant wages or the collapse of traditional career paths. This isn't ambition. It's desperation. A generation racing to outrun an economy that's left them behind. The gig economy was supposed to set them free. Instead, it's built a cage of endless hustle, one that Gen Z can't afford to escape. But who's really cashing in? It was supposed to be the beginning of something great. A new chapter, a new workforce. But for Gen Z, it became a nightmare. The global pandemic wasn't just a health crisis. It was an economic disaster. One that hit an entire generation at the worst possible time. The shadow of the pandemic. Entering the workforce is never easy, but imagine stepping in just as the world shuts down. Layoffs, hiring freezes, an economy in free fall. Millions lost jobs overnight. And for Gen Z, the ones just starting out, there was nowhere to go. Internships vanished. Job offers were rescinded. Career growth stalled before it could even begin. But the impact wasn't just financial. The stress, the uncertainty, it all took a toll. Burnout rates, higher than ever. Financial stress, a daily battle. And the scars left behind, they don't just fade away. Missed opportunities, lost income, a workforce forced to play catch up for years to come. The question now is, can they ever recover? The pandemic may be over, but its shadow still lingers. They say hard work pays off, that if you put in the effort, you'll get ahead. But what happens when the numbers don't add up? When your paycheck stays the same, but everything around you keeps getting more expensive? Welcome to the reality of modern life, where survival costs more than ever before. Inflation and the cost of living. It's a word economists love to throw around. But for millions, it's more than just a number. It's the difference between making rent or being forced out. The essentials, food, transportation, healthcare, all rising at an alarming rate. The price of groceries, up nearly 30% in the last few years. Gas, a daily gamble. Healthcare, a single bill can be financially devastating.
Commuting to class looks different for Tim Chen, who doesn't board a bus, but a plane to get to university. The arts student flies twice a week from Calgary to Vancouver, saving big bucks on rent.
I need to pay like $2,500 for the rent. I don't feel that is viable.
He pays roughly $150 per round-trip flight twice a week, about $1,200 per month total. That's half the average rent for a one-bedroom in the city.
I thought, why don't I just stay at Calgary and then just fly here? 1 hour flight. That's same shit taking a bus.
We've even seen UBC students living in vans when unable to afford rent.
This was the only financially viable option, as I couldn't afford a bachelor suite of a kind by myself.
But what about wages? Surely, if costs are climbing, paychecks are rising too. Right? Wrong. Wages haven't kept up. In fact, adjusted for inflation, many are earning less than they did a decade ago. For the average worker, this means working harder for less. It's a silent crisis, one that's making survival not luxury, an uphill battle. Ah yes, the famous avocado toast theory.
Gen Z has been hit the hardest in the cost of living crunch. 90% of Gen Z said they've reduced their spending, according to data from Finder, and 70% said that they are enjoying their life less. But why is the cost of living hitting us so hard? Gen Z has been in the workforce for the shortest amount of time. We've had the least amount of savings, so it makes us vulnerable to things like rising rent prices and rising grocery costs. All of this means that we've had to delay buying a house, or we simply can't afford to.
The idea that young people are struggling, not because they spend too much on brunch.
No one talks about how millennials and Gen Zs can't afford homes, yet generations before didn't have European vacation, streaming services, nails every month, concerts, lattes, appointments, wardrobe, cosmetics, and dinner every single week. This is the biggest misconception plaguing the people under 40 in this country. The reason they can't afford homes is because homes in the past 5 years went from $250,000 to $420,000. In 2019, you only needed $50,000 in salary to qualify. Now, in most cases, you need $120,000. So you got to think about the average millennial and Gen Zer. They have $60,000 of student loan debt, car and credit cards, and they're trying to save $60,000 more for a down payment on a house. That is a huge feat for someone making $58,000 a year with these high rent prices and high grocery prices. So even if they took out all this fun and saved $10,000 a year, it would still take them 12 years to pay off that debt and save for a house. So if they know it's going to take 10, 12, 15 years to do this now, they're going to sacrifice in smaller increments. So if a millennial is lucky enough, which many don't, to have an extra $500 at the end of the month, they'll put $300 towards their debt, but they're going to spend the other $200 on brunch and a Taylor Swift concert. There are going to be some millennials and Gen Zers who overspend, but for 90% of people under 40 with kids and college debt, they can't afford a home because the interest rate and home prices are through the roof, not because of lattes and concerts.
But let's get real. The cost of a house today, over 100% higher than it was for boomers at the same age. Student loan debt, at an all-time high. Rent, consuming more than half of many workers' paychecks. The real culprits? Stagnant wages, a housing market locked against first-time buyers. A corporate system prioritizing profits over people. So no, it's not the coffee, it's not the brunch, it's not a lack of discipline. It's a system where the cost of living keeps rising, but wages stay frozen in time.
The orange line is the price of rent and the blue line is the income, which means that we've been having inflation since 1985. And now you wonder why it's a large percent of Gen Z that still stand with their parents.
This isn't about luxury. This is about survival. And as long as the gap between wages and the cost of living grows, the future remains uncertain. The fight isn't over, and neither is the story. The pandemic only made things worse. Inflation, layoffs, mental health crises. Gen Z was hit harder than most, and the scars are still fresh. But here's the question no one wants to ask. Is this just the new normal, or is there still hope?